Okay, let's keep reading Kenny and the Dragon. We are up to chapter 4. You're all right in my book. It was getting late now, and Kenny's mum was pacing on the front porch, awaiting her son's return. Kenny's father was untroubled by the lateness and reminded her that they should trust their son's judgment on matters concerning nature and fairy tales. And as Kenny coasted in out of the darkness and into the yellowy porch light, he knew it was going to take some work to convince his folks to go up and meet Graham. So he got to it immediately upon his return. He recounted in great detail his conversation with the dragon. During his bath, he told his mum he was swallowed up in an earthquake centuries ago, where he survived by drinking lava and eating fire rocks. But it's okay, he won't burn me. As he climbed into bed, he told his father, Graham says there used to be dragons everywhere, eating people and burning castles. But don't worry, Dad, he won't eat me. And at breakfast the next morning he told both his parents he likes to read and recite poetry and eat creme brulee. I can't wait to see him again. I am thrilled to hear you've met someone you get along with so well, Kenneth, his mother said as she flipped a fourth helping of pancakes onto his father's plate. But if you're planning on spending more time with that dragon, then I think it best that your father and I go up and meet him too. Don't you think so, Pa? I do indeedy, his father replied as he sipped his coffee. As long as this isn't some plan to eat my sheep, my son, or us, we are all on the same page. So, after school and after his father brought the flock in for the day, the family trotted up to the top of the hill with picnic baskets in hand to meet Kenny's new acquaintance. As they neared the grassy summit, Kenny's father stopped them all just short of the hilltop. He leaned on his walking stick and sized Graham up while slowly chewing on a stalk of grass. A large, blue-scaled creature was arranging the boulders at his cave entrance. He'd step back and study them, then adjust one here and another there, then step back and look at it again. Finally, he noticed Kenny and his family watching him. Ah, ho there, Graham said with a toothy grin. I was tidying the place up for your visit. Kenny's father put his paw on his son's shoulder and spoke first. So you're not the type of fella to be deceitful to my little boy and trick us into your belly? The drake's eyes went wide and he let out the slightest gasp. Goodness gracious, no, he replied. But I may trick you into reciting a favourite poem if your son's a chip off the old block. I would imagine you are a fellow connoisseur of the spoken word, yes? Kenny's dad just stood there chewing on his stalk of grass. The dragon looked at Kenny for a sign, but the boy just shrugged. At last his mum grabbed his father by the arm and smiled at Graham. We are very delighted to meet you, Mr. Dragon. Thank you for not eating us. I think you'll enjoy my cooking much better anyway. She turned to Kenny. Kenneth, dear, help me set up the picnic blanket. Please allow me, Graham said, and walked up to offer assistance. In doing so, he inadvertently stepped right on Kenny's father's foot. His father didn't utter a word. His large eyes said it all. I am terribly sorry, sir, Graham said, then hiccuped. A small fireball puffed out of his mouth, engulfing the farmer. Kenny's father looked down at his son as the last of his singed eyebrows fell to the ground, Fell to the ground. The boy kept his mouth shut tight, barely suppressing his giggle. Oh goodness, the dragon said, covering his mouth. I'm a bit skimble-scamble today, and when I get nervous, I hic. Kenny's mum took off her apron off and wiped the ash from her husband's face. Kenneth, she said, get some cool water for your father's foot. It should keep the swelling down. There's that creek at the foot of the hill, Graham said as he took the bucket that they'd used to carry refreshments. In the dragon's scaly hand it looked like a tiny drinking cup. Let me go. Get it. With that he bounded off. I don't want any whining, Pa, Kenny's mum said, putting his hat back on over his singed hair. You'll be fine. Besides, you're making him as nervous as all get out. With Kenny's dad comfortably soaking his foot, dinner was served. Spread out on the gingham picnic blanket was a delicious meal of radish souffle, sweet glazed carrots, and parsleyed potatoes. Yum. The dragon squealed, "Oh, I haven't had sweet morsels like this in a long, long time." And then he grabbed the entire bowl of carrots and tipped them over his open maw. "Hey, mister!" Kenny's mum thumped Graham with her wooden ladle. "Mind your manners." "My apologies," he replied, gently placing the bowl back down on the blanket. "It's just that this spread is spectacular, and the mouth-watering aroma took complete control of me." The dragon winced with embarrassment. Kenny chortled. As they enjoyed their supper, Graham told Kenny's mum the stories he'd heard of the grand meals the royal chefs cooked each day for the king. He even gave her a few recipes. The creme brulee, torched expertly by Graham using his left nostril, was delicious. Kenny's dad smoked his after-dinner pipe while Graham recited several of his favourite poems above the twitter of the chirruping crickets. As Kenny watched the lights flicker on in the town below, he thought it was one of the best dinners ever. "Well, Mr. Graham," Kenny's mum said, we must be getting back. I've a kitchen to clean and a boy to get to bed. After all, this is a school night." "Understandable, my lady. Thank you all so much for coming up and visiting," said Graham. "It was a magnificent meal." He turned to Kenny's dad. "I apologise for the foot. I trust it will be okay." "It'll all be just dandy, Dragon." He paused for a moment, stroking his whiskers. "You know, being that this here hill is on our property, you can stay up here as long as you'd like." He knelt down and gathered some dinnerware. "Just watch yourself, folks. May not take a liking to a dragon living in these parts. Mum's the word." "So long, Graham," Kenny said as he shook hands, claw, with him. "See you tomorrow." Both the dragon and the young rabbit looked over at Kenny's parents. "Oh, of course," his mum said, "but Pa is right. Be careful." School the following week was not as exciting to Kenny as it had been before he'd met the dragon. Summer break was fast approaching and every class was packed with end-of-year merriment. Even so, Kenny couldn't wait to get home so he could spend the remainder of the day with his newfound friend. Every afternoon, Kenny went up to visit the dragon on the hill. On the weekend, Kenny's mum invited Graham to have dinner at their house, but since he was far too large to come inside, they decided it was best that he simply put his massive head through their kitchen window, where a place was set for him at their table. The following Tuesday was the last day of school, and the students were let out early. Kenny rode his bike as fast as he could to the top of Shepherd's Hill so that he could tell Graham about his day. He found him sitting in front of an old upright piano, wires jutting out from the top like dead stems in a flower vase. "Ho, Bantling, look what your mum found in the barn. I think I can get it working again too," Graham said as he pulled on a string and gently tapped a key. "Neat," Kenny replied. "Hey, I received my grade for my book report today." "And, well, my teacher was fine with me switching books. She knew I'd read stars and their constellations before anyway, but I'm not sure that what she thought of me debunking the facts in the King's Royal Bestiary. She felt that those scholars must be the best in the land. After all, they were hired by the king." "King Schming, what does he know?" Graham replied, tapping another key. "Exactly. I told her that unlike the author of the book, I had a first-hand account of what a real dragon was like." Graham stopped hitting the piano keys and looked at Kenny. "What did she say?" "She said I had a great imagination and gave me a B+ for effort." "Well done. You'll go on to write your own bestiary some day, you'll see." Dragon smiled and returned to tuning the piano. "So," Kenny said as he emptied out his book bag, "what are we reading next?" A dozen different books gathered from his bedroom bookshelf fell out onto the grass. For the next couple of weeks, the dragon and Kenny read every book that he owned. "I had no idea the entire planet was populated by giant lizards like myself. What a rollicking time that must have been," Graham said of a book on dinosaurs. "Humph! This Beowulf fellow had a severe anger management problem," he sneered after he and Kenny read the epic poem about the Nordic warrior. "He's quite a blackguard, if you ask me." "You mean to tell me that these creepy crawlies turning out into beautiful butterflies? Now that's true magic," he declared after studying Kenny's book on insects. Some days the two were too excited to relax and read, so they would invent other fun activities to do. I had no idea you could make a kite out of stuff from around the house, Kenny said as they flew homemade kites on the hilltop one windy afternoon. Wow, I am no good with watercolours, the lad said with a sigh one dusky evening, but this sunset sure is pretty, and your painting looks great. My mum used to play a lot, Kenny said, sitting at the piano stool. She's going to flip when she hears that I learned how to play chopsticks. It's her favourite. One sunny Friday afternoon, the two were relaxing under the shade of the large willow. What made it extra comfy was that they were on an old rug Kenny's mum had brought up from the house for the dragon to sleep on. I'd love to hear more tales by these Grimm brothers, Graham said, munching on a pear. Their work is quite entertaining. I really like them too, Kenny agreed, grabbing a pair of his own out of the basket. You know, George, who owns the bookshop in town, said they didn't really create these stories. Really? Who did? The locals in the countryside. They told their stories to the brothers, who just collected them and wrote them down, Kenny answered. Wow, Graham said with his mouth full of pear. What a great town they must have lived in. Look at all the tales that came from it. Yeah, too bad nobody in this town is like that. Everybody here is more worried about their crops than telling stories, said Kenny, looking down at Round Brook from the hilltop. I can understand that. We all need food, Graham said, picking his teeth. But I bet you could come up with a grand tale of your own, and I could help you write it. Really? The boy said, looking up. Sure, why not? Who else is going to create the next great stories for kids to read? The Drake replied. Kenny thought about this for a moment, then looked down at the books scattered around him on the blanket. Graham, he said, a lot of other kids in town, they don't really get me. I don't even know if they like me. Nonsense, complete nonsense, the dragon declared. Then he began counting off on his clawed fingers. You're well read, you love nature, you love food, music, art, poetry. What's not to like? The boy sighed. I just wanted to say, he said, still looking down, you're the best friend I've ever had. Really? Graham replied. His lemony eyes were wide and glowing in the shade of the willow tree. You know, little bantling, you're all right in my book. Even though I have vicious coils, Kenny said with a smile. Even with your vicious coils, you devil scourge, said Graham, and threw a pear core at Kenny, which he dodged with ease as he scuttled behind the trunk of the willow. So tell me, are there any other storytellers like these Grimm brothers? Oh, yes. George told me about another guy named Hans something. Kenny reappeared on the opposite side of the tree trunk. I can get his book next. He lobbed a pear core of his own back at Graham, which the drake caught in his toothy maw and spit back at the boy. Ducking as it flew overhead, Kenny added, I should probably go see George tomorrow. I usually visit him once a week and I haven't been to town for a while. And so, early the next day, after his chores were finished, Kenny rode into town to return the borrowed books to his friend George. It was on Main Street, in the centre of his little town of Round Brook, that Kenny spied quite a gathering. Townsfolk and villagers were huddled around a newsboy who was selling them the daily paper as fast as his little paws could go. The citizens mumbled, whispered and growled amongst themselves. Graham would enjoy a bit of local news, Kenny thought, as he hopped off his bike and wiggled into the mass. People will come from far and wide. It will certainly create a ruckus, that's for sure, he overheard someone say. I don't believe it at all. This is rubbish. No, I heard somebody saw it firsthand. But the children, I wonder if there should be a curfew. Not to worry, the matter should be resolved very soon. Then Kenny saw the headline. Dragon spotted in Round Brook. Infamous scourge seen on Shepherd's Hill. Fear not, citizens. Extermination is imminent.
Who said that?
The people in the village. There they are, gathering around, talking about killing the dragon. We'll have to see what happens next.